All right. Welcome, everyone. I am going to start seeing all of you start to file in here pretty soon. I know most of you come right at 2. There you are. I am here today in our 8th webinar. We're so excited for how well these have been going. I've been getting all of your emails and messages about how much you've been enjoying this series and what you've been learning. And I think we are going to try to keep it going. So if there are any topics that you want to hear about from an expert, please let me know. I would love to try and develop a fall schedule for us. But today we have Chanel here, who is going to be talking to us about what happens when my kids are victimized and what happens when they come to us. And many of you may know Chanel because she is our Mending the Soul basic program director. She has talked to most of you on this page, if you're watching on Facebook Live, about how to start groups and has supported many of you in doing that. And Chanel became familiar with Mending the Soul because her own kids were victimized and came to her. And so she is going to be incredibly vulnerable and honest with us today about that experience, and I know we are going to learn so much from her. So other than that, Chanel had a long history as an educator. I think you would describe yourself as a teacher first, right?
Yes, I would.
Yes, and so Chanel has a master's in education. She had 4 kids. Long history in a pretty fundamentalist, would you use that word? Conservative Christian denomination. Parents were pastors. Husband was on the worship team. 2 boys and 2 girls. Everything looked exactly like it should on the outside. And then some things boiled up to the top and revealed themselves. And last week we talked to your brother-in-law, Tim, about some aspects of what you'll be sharing with us today. And his story was super helpful. I got tons of feedback on that. So we're all excited to hear from you today. Why don't you, I'll go ahead and catch everybody up to when your girls came to you. They were 11 and 13? Is that right?
11 and 15.
11 and 15. And the oldest daughter went to Tim, who was with us last week, who was the head pastor of the church where you all attended, the whole family. And this was after she had come to you. So a few weeks prior to that, your youngest came to you. You want to tell us about that conversation, what happened there, what was said there? If there's any background I missed, go ahead and share that too.
Okay. Yeah, so I had gotten married when I was 21, and I married the drummer, because that's what you do as the pastor's daughter. And his family had gone to our church for a number of years, and so we had been married for right about 16 years when this happened. And one night I had a couple of things, but one night I had, it was actually both of my girls that came to me, but it was my oldest telling me that my youngest had something to tell me. And it was all very confusing, but basically my youngest was telling me that she felt like somebody was touching her during the night. And I got very upset and was like, oh my God, if it's your dad, we need to call the police. And she began to yell, no, it wasn't him and all that. And I honestly, as far as like that conversation, when I remember feeling very afraid and not really knowing like what to do with that conversation, and really didn't do much with it. But then it was probably about maybe not even 2 weeks later, on September 24th of 2006, that Natalia, my oldest, was able to, she told my brother-in-law, who spoke last week. And yes, and so that's how that came about. And that's how, by Natalia telling, it was able to, my oldest telling, it was able to get it outside of it still was inside the family, but outside enough of the family for it not to be squelched.
Yeah. And so she went to Tim. Tim believed her right away, went to your dad. Everybody gets pulled into your dad's office. Mm-hmm. Your husband, the accused abuser or the alleged abuser at that point, Tim, you, your mom, who was a pastor at the church, your dad, who's a pastor at the church, and your oldest daughter. And Tim described that as a really troubling meeting from his perspective. What was happening in your mind as you're sitting in that office with all of those people?
From my perspective, I just went into a fog. I remember a lot, like crying a lot, trying to like very, very puzzled. I just went into like this very deep disconnect would be the way I would describe it. I would describe it now. And there was some complicating factors in terms of I had sensed and seen and caught a couple of times where we had a 27-year-old youth minister at the time at our church, and he had, unbeknownst to me, he would be sending things to Natalia like religious books, like John Maxwell books, or and I remember that I was like really uncomfortable with like what was going on, and there was a couple of times that I had caught her talking to him, and I told her that she could not talk to him. And again, just having no education around like pedophiles and how they groom and what they do. I didn't even know what to do with that situation, but I know that in my mind, that situation was coming up at the time in the office, that it complicated that. I just remember thinking like, well, maybe she was mad at her dad, you know what I'm saying? Because he was trying to keep her from seeing this older man. And, but I think really it was just my mind was trying to just scramble somehow for this just not to be true, because it was so like how do you believe how do you believe, right? It's like, how do you believe that the person that I have loved, that I would have told you at the time that was a good father and a good husband, how do you get your mind around that he could be doing something like this awful to your children? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was very complicated. So my memories of in the office are just not super distinct, because I just disconnected at that
Mm-hmm.
time.
Yeah, you told me that also the way your husband had groomed this situation, and you, should this ever come to light, was that he had really trained you to believe that your oldest was a liar. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So it as things unfolded, and so this was a little later down the line as I began to understand what had gone on in my home. He pretty much set me up to be the disciplinarian in the home. And so what he would do is he would bring Natalia to me, and he would tell me that she had lied to him, that he had caught her in a lie. And I would be the one that disciplined her. Mm-hmm. So in being able to talk to Natalia and find out there was times Natalia was lying. He was forcing her to live a lie. So mm-hmm. There was times that she was lying legitimately. I mean, of course she was. Mm-hmm. But then there was other times when he was deliberately saying that she had lied when she had not, mm-hmm. knowing that I would believe him over her, mm-hmm. and that I would discipline her. And so he was setting me up to believe that she was a liar, setting her up to believe that I would not stand up for her, that I would not be there for her, that I would not hear what she had mm-hmm. to say. So there was very much a grooming technique going on. And then interestingly, with my second daughter, he had a whole nother grooming technique going on with her. He didn't try to make her out to be a liar, but he was presenting himself to her, and he would say things in front of me like, I told Kiana, I know everything, don't I? And he would get me like as if he was playing, but he would get me to say things like, well, yeah, you know everything, like in a teasing way. But when I look back, it's like, oh my God.
Oh, kid doesn't know the difference, right?
Yeah,
like I have my kids convinced I know everything.
and that could be a very, if it wasn't for his reasoning underneath and why he was doing it and how he did it differently. He basically fine-tuned his grooming technique for each person.
Yeah.
And in other words, is what made it insidious. Because on the surface level, those things could not be anything, but for him, there was very much a dark meaning involved.
Mm-hmm. So we have this meeting. All of that is like context, background to what's happening for you in this meeting. Natalia lies. She might be mad at her dad. This isn't possible. I'm married to this man. I sleep with him. I know he didn't do this. Maybe she's got something going on with this other guy and she's blaming it on her dad. And I can't handle this, right? Like, above all else, I can't handle this. I've got a Bible study to lead. So you told me you actually went home and led a Bible study.
I did.
Because your brain just was like, nope, not happening, right?
I did.
Yeah.
I checked out at the meeting. I would say that I literally checked out.
Yeah.
I did have my mom ask my younger daughter after the meeting. And of course, my younger daughter said no. Of course. I mean, it was, the emotions were so high and the fear. And so, I mean, there was, again, like all of those complicating factors in not being clueless
Right.
as to how to walk through these types of situations.
Yeah.
But yeah, I went home and I did what pastors' daughters do when you're part of the pastor family. And I took care of other people. But after the meeting was over, the girls had not come home with us. They had gone with my parents, and I went to get their clothes. And I remember going up to my daughter's room and was pulling her clothes out, and I just started screaming, like blood curdling, not like barely screaming, like blood curdling screams. And I remember in my head thinking, I don't know if I'm going to be able to stop. I mean, in other words, I was realizing that this is way too overwhelming. I don't know what's going on, but yet I couldn't like get it formulated enough to the front of my, to really get it outside of me, to have someone to talk to get help, to figure out how to get my way through this and figure out the different levels and what was actually happening.
Mm-hmm.
And
so the girls go with your parents. And I know Tim had mentioned he didn't necessarily think that was the best move because they did not believe the girls. So there was a lot of like, this didn't happen going on there, right? Like continuing to not believe the girls. Eventually you do leave and you and your 4 kids go stay with Tim, your brother-in-law, and your sister. There was a lot of other complicating factors we're not going to get into, as there would be with any family. So I just want everybody to know you're not getting the whole story. Believe me, you don't need it. We don't have time for that today.
Take hours. Hours of unpacking. We did actually, though, Steffi, we actually stayed with my parents for 2 years.
Okay.
We did. I walked, it was a couple weeks later that I walked out of my house at the time. So what Steffi had mentioned earlier, here we are, 4 children, beautiful family, 5-bedroom, 3.5 bath house, and, all the trappings, in other words. And a couple of weeks later, just prompting from God, I walked out of my house. My dad actually picked me up, and I got my kids' stuff together, and I walked out to never stay the night in that house again. I'm so thankful to God and to my girls because I listened to his prompting. I listened, and even through the midst of all of that and not understanding and not yet being able to wrap my mind around what was actually going on, I still was enough to be able to hear that inner voice inside of myself and got myself and got my children to safety. So I actually stayed with my parents for several years. I had not worked for over 10 years. Come to find out at the time, I had $40 to my name.
Wow.
So there was tons of other types of abuses. Obviously, those are nothing compared to what he did to children. But there was tons of other types of abuses that were occurring underneath also. But yes, I got out of there, and it was actually when I first began to wrap my mind around was when a detective, we got Natalia to the police, and she again bravely told her story. And that seasoned detective who knows what he's doing, this is what he does. This was his job, in other words. And I will never forget, I do not recall his name, but I will never forget his kind face and him looking at me and saying, Chanel, I don't know if we're going to be able to get him or not, but this happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that moment when I realized, in other words, it said he was kind, he wasn't mean, but it was like, oh my God, the fear then that fell over me to realize what my children had been enduring in my home was overwhelming, to say the least.
Well, and he's their dad. And so there's also the fear of, am I going to be able to keep him away from them?
Right, absolutely. And I faced that fear in the first year over and over again. Repeatedly, I had to face down that fear because there were steps that I had to take to keep them safe with no guarantee as to knowing that I didn't have the full power in making all of those final decisions. Though at that point in time, once I realized what was happening, I would have run if I had to. I thank God I didn't, but I would have done whatever I needed to have protected my children at that point in time. Once I began to wrap my mind around what had actually been happening, and Natalia was and it came out very quickly that it wasn't just, it was her dad was molesting her, but she was also being abused and molested by that youth leader.
Yeah. So. Which I think is really key for the parents listening. Once a child has been victimized, it's almost like it opens this door where they become, like, think of an injured animal, that once they've been injured, the pack sees them as weak and a pedophile knows what that looks like. You and I do not, because we don't think that way. But they are keen to be able to spot the injured animal. And so, you may have heard like multiple stories. Why does this girl keep getting raped? Why is she getting raped 6 and 7 times? That's weird. She must be doing something wrong. No, she's injured. And it opens you up to be treated that way. I mean, if you kick a dog over and over again, it's going to shrink back, right? And that's kind of the same mental or emotional damage that's done. So I just want parents and everybody to be aware that when you hear, oh, this girl came out, but she accused so-and-so, that doesn't mean it didn't happen. It probably means it really did happen, because she is more vulnerable to that because of her prior wounding than a child that never had any emotional abuse or physical abuse or sexual abuse. So I think that's really important to share, Chanel.
The psychologist which was there were so many miracles that God began to perform in our lives, but I recall definitely the psychologist that I got the girls to, that's exactly what she described to Natalia. She was like, it's like you have an invisible red dot on your forehead that all the perpetrators, other people can't see. People who don't have bad intent, they don't see that, but perpetrators see that. Until you have healed, it remains on your forehead.
Yeah, absolutely. So just catch us up. We have been answering these questions without asking them. So hang on one second, let me catch up with myself. We talked about what things he did to groom the girls and a little bit about what he did to groom you, but how did he create this culture, for lack of a better word, in your home and in your marriage that this could happen and that you wouldn't know?
Well, he presented himself as just a very kind, he was very good looking, and he presented himself as very kind and very helpful, even with other people outside of our home. If somebody, like one of the elderly ladies in the church needed something, then he was right over there doing it. He was always super helpful to my parents. I mean, he did not just groom me. He groomed my parents. He groomed everybody around us that was within close vicinity of us to the persona that he was a good person, and that he was kind, and that of course he would never do, anything like this.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so I mean, he presented himself in all of the right ways, but he was very much a chameleon. So he would switch for whatever the situation needed. Then he would switch. So it's interesting looking back, because basically he would gauge, when I look back on it, he would gauge his emotions by my emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I smiled, he would mirror my emotions when I look back, rather than actually presenting like his own persona and his own emotions. That wasn't actually happening. And so it's kind of, yeah, it's amazing. I always tell people that it's the ones sometimes that are the most unexpected that you need to really be taking a second look at. The ones that come across as the best dads, or in other words, the ones that are fitting in. It's not the oddballs that aren't fitting in, because by the way, they're showing up. They're obvious. It's the less obvious ones.
Yeah, people are watching them. Yeah.
That we need to be, without walking around I'm not advocating walking around being paranoid either, but I'm walking around with our senses raised and heightened,
wide open,
about that this goes on in our world. And if you, and I don't in any way mean to be mean, but if you had asked me as a pastor's daughter, I would have been like, no, that doesn't happen. That only happens in, and I'm sorry to be crass, like low income families where, or low social economic places, or no, it doesn't happen to us. And so while I had actually being an educator, I had educated my children like over and over again about coming to me. And I believe that is why they came to me. What I hadn't done is I hadn't educated myself on how to respond. That's what I hadn't done. And so that's where I was unprepared, was on how to respond. And in reality, as an adult, all of us, it's our responsibility to protect children. It's not children's responsibility to protect themselves. It's our responsibility to protect them. So we should be educating ourselves on, if a child comes to us or we observe something, what is our steps? What are we going to do? Like an automatic step. Not, I'm going to think about this and I'm going to try to figure out if this is right or not, or whether this is true or not. No, we should not even go there. That's not our job.
Yeah.
We should know, this is how I'm going to react.
I think that's really key. So I want to reiterate it. And this, if you're at church and a kid comes, if one of your own children comes, if you're a teacher, anybody that's in law enforcement or any kind of family advocacy group will tell you, do not ask questions. And the reason for that is the more times a kid has to repeat it, it does change, because every time you tell a story, it changes, regardless of how much you're trying not to change it. It just does. And the words that the child uses the first time to tell their story are incredibly important. The way they tell it is incredibly important. And so that first time a child says, I think somebody's touching me, somebody did touch me, that person made me feel uncomfortable, you don't freak out. You don't say, are you sure? Because they'll say, no, I'm not sure. Most likely you do call. And there are some really great family advocacy centers here in Arizona and in other states, but I know of the ones here in Arizona specifically. So if you look up a family advocacy center, that would be a really good place to take your kid first, rather than the police station, which can be scary and gross and unfriendly. So I think that's key, Chanel, is that you don't do the investigating, because had you been a really good investigator, it wouldn't have happened. And that's not because you're to blame, but we don't know the question. We aren't trained to ask the questions and be able to determine a truth or a lie. And I'm going to go more into that in our How to Protect Our Kids webinar, which I'll be leading, just talking about the fact that research shows even the most trained people have virtually the same luck, and it is luck, in being able to detect a lie based off of just talking to somebody. And it's about as good as flipping a coin. Right. So it's really important that you not put yourself in a position of being that person. Um, what did you do to start to make this shift? I know you moved out, you took Natalia to the police. What did you do to make the turn towards healing and recovering this situation?
Well, I knew, again, because of being educated, I knew to get my children help. And so I very quickly I actually got them to psychologists, and I did all four of them. So I have two girls and two boys. And I first got the girls to a great psychologist that began to help them with talking to them. And then I got my boys to a psychologist, and then I got myself to a psychologist. So for quite some time, that was basically what my life was. Lack of a better word, God gave me a job. It was and I was able to walk into it, and the hours that I spent outside of working was taking my children to psychologists. I also began to talk about it, and it was interesting because I didn't really grow up in a culture. We didn't really talk about those kinds of things, but there was something inside of me that was like, no, I'm not going to be silent. And I don't even know, maybe I don't even know exactly why, but somehow I realized that if we were silent, that my girls would carry more shame, that they would carry the shame of the abuser. And so I became I began talking, and I began talking about how that it was not their shame. I began talking about the fact, very quickly, once I realized, I began talking about the fact that they were heroes. They are heroes. They changed the trajectory of my family, my life, and the lives of my children, their own life, and even their brothers' lives. Because if they had not spoke up, there is no telling how long that we would have continued down that path of them being abused, other children being abused, of drugs and alcohol and all of the stuff that comes into play because of the fact that we're trying to cope. Children are trying to cope with being abused. I mean, there's just so many things that if they had not spoke up, that would have happened, but they did. And they're heroes, and they know that. I tell them they're heroes in my life. The other thing that I did for myself was I didn't hide my mistakes. I was very open. So the first ones that I went to with the mistakes that I've made was to my children. And that's been more than one time, because of the times that there was layers. But going to them and saying, and being very open with, this is what I did wrong. This is totally what I did wrong. This is what I should have done. This is what I did wrong. And I'm letting you know that I know that I'm wrong. And that when you are able to forgive me, you're not forced to forgive me. It's okay for you to tell me that you're angry at me. It's okay for you to be mad at me. It's okay for you to express that to me. But I was wrong, and I want you to know, I know that. And I didn't only tell them, that once I had told them, I told other people, because even in that, Steffi, our secrets, we don't keep our secrets keep us. And so even like through this situation, if I had presented it as that I just did everything right, and oh my God, I'm this like perfect parent, I would have had all of these secrets that I would have been worried about, that they would have come out. And it was like, no, that's not, no, I made mistakes. And I've actually become thankful for those mistakes, because they've helped me when I walk with other mothers to not have expectations that they're going to do everything right. And to know that even though I started off wrong, and even though I was really having a hard time, because people came around me. So like that detective, because he gently came around me and said, this has happened, I was able to hear him. I was able to start down that path and to feel that fear, but begin to do something about protecting my children, because he's mine. And that's my thing is that's what we have to do as people for one another and communities. Because by the way, there wasn't very many that stayed with us, and there wasn't very many that supported me in protecting my children, and that's no judgment. I'm not judging on them, because they couldn't handle it. It was
Yeah.
too much. It had happened in our community, and it might could happen if it happened to me, the pastor's daughter. It might could happen to them.
Mm-hmm.
But in that, it was all the more fearful and all the harder for me. So I think if as a community and as adults, if we can raise our awareness about these things happening and we can support one another in meaningful ways,
Mm-hmm.
we can really make a difference in the lives of those walking through these type of situations.
I think it's so interesting that you're mentioning that because I know you know this, but a few months ago, I had an interaction where the husband of the principal of the school where my kids attend is a sexual predator. And it was interesting to me, the reactions of the people that I shared it with, and how there's this clear division between, I can't handle that, get it away from me. I'm not willing to even listen to it. Which was triggering because of my own story of abuse. And that was the reaction of the people in our church when I was abused. I don't want to know who it is. You don't want to know who it is. What's wrong with you? You know what I mean?
Right,
but I think
exactly.
it's very human. My husband
Right.
said, I think that's normal because it's too much. And so I think you hit the nail on the head. We don't keep our secrets. Our secrets keep us. I love that. That needs to be on a pillow everywhere. And you have to know. You don't have the luxury as a parent of pretending that it doesn't happen. The statistics are against you. The science is against you in that it does happen. And you are supposed to be aware of the dangers surrounding your kids. And so I think you said it so well there that so many people just don't want to believe that it could happen to them. It's the single moms that are working all the time and they're not watching their kids, or it's the ones with men in and out of the house, or it's the so-and-so. It's certainly not the people like me. And I think that's one of the reasons I love that you're sharing today is you were married, you were in the church, your husband was in the church, your family was in the church,
Right.
and it happened to you.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
and the other thing that I did in terms of healing, I was going to a counselor, but I didn't know the questions to ask myself to be able to heal. And I remember, and I wanted my children to heal. That was, to me, it was like, they are the ones that deserve to heal. They are children. I want my children to heal in that desperation as a mom. And yet that is not something that, yes, I could take them to psychologists, but that wasn't something I could entirely control. And I literally remember like the question dropping into my head that it was like, well, what if they don't choose to heal? And I was like, immediately I was like, well, I'm going to heal. And in that, God within of saying that, within a matter of weeks, God led me to Mending the Soul. I was actually at a Celebrate Recovery meeting, and I told enough of my story that this beautiful, incredible Mending the Soul facilitator came up and said, hey, Chanel, I think this would be really, really good for you. And I was like, absolutely. And in that, what Mending the Soul did for me that I absolutely is incredible is that it asked the questions that I didn't know how to ask myself. To get down to the root of, why was I vulnerable? Why was I vulnerable to this man in the first place at 21 years old? Why was I vulnerable? What had happened? What are the things that had happened in my life that I yet had not processed and unpacked and healed from? And those 14 weeks, I healed. I'm telling you, it was work and it was intense, but I healed. And when I healed, the beauty of what that did is that my family began to heal, because I was able to make, because I had healed, I was able to make it not about me. Because I had processed my story, I was able then to step into the stories with my daughters at different times when it was appropriate, and I was able to let it be about them and it not be about me. And I was also able to just literally generationally change the way that these type of situations were handled. It's like I was able to stand up and say, okay, not in my family. This may have been how it was done for generations, but not in my family. My heritage, my lineage, and I've always said, Steffi, if God gave me responsibility for anybody, it's not for the adults out there. It's not, he gave me responsibility for those children that were conceived and my body helped protect and form and birth.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where it starts. And so the way, when I healed, the way that I mothered changed, my home changed, the way that we interacted changed, the way that I taught my children to even interact with one another became more loving and more kind, and we talked more. And it just, that would be my number one thing to mamas out there and to dads, because there's dads that are
Mm-hmm.
dealing with their children having been sexually abused, is go do your own work. Because
Mm-hmm.
if you do your own work, your child will do their own work
Mm-hmm.
eventually in their own time.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Let's get down to the nitty gritty here. The reason I think a lot of people are coming in is, what don't I do and what do I do, right? So let's talk about what you think you did wrong. And you listed a few things. So if you miss any of these, I'll go ahead and
Okay.
remind you of them. But what do you feel like you did wrong?
The night that the girls' game came to me previous, what I should have absolutely have done that night, regardless of not knowing what was going on or understanding. And I didn't even mention, I actually had a head injury a few weeks prior. So I was dealing with a concussion at the same time when the girls had come to me. And I know that all things, it was just complicated. But what I should have done was literally picked up the phone and called the police.
Mm-hmm.
It was late at night. It doesn't matter. They have people on staff for those type of situations late at night. I should have immediately separated myself, got my children and separated myself from the abuser, from who my children were saying, and allowed allowed those that were experts to take over, so that they could have figured out what was going on. That to me is the number one thing. It's like, don't ask questions. Don't try to figure things out. Just pick the phone up and call the police and get somebody involved who they know what they're doing. This is what they do. This is what they are trained to do. In other words, so, if I have cancer, I don't go talk to my friends and all this. I go to the doctor. I go to the ones, in other words, that have been trained to take care of the situation that I am in. And it's the same way with these situations. Go to who it is. Your mind wants to go all the way down the path of, oh my God, what if I'm falsely accusing someone? You know what? The people that you're falsely accusing are going to be adult. I mean, the people that might be falsely accused would be adults. They'll work through it and get over it. If there's a misunderstanding there or something, they will be okay. Your first responsibility is to the child and protecting the child. Right. That would be, to me, if you take that step and don't worry about what's to come after it, just get help.
Yeah.
I would say if you
I think that's a big thing. I don't want to be that person that called the police and accused somebody. And the reality is, what's the alternative?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and the fact of the matter is it's not even like that. You're not even accusing them. What you're saying is this situation has arisen and I need help with this. I need to know. You're the expert. I need you to take over from here and help me with knowing what is going on. And to me, that's whether it's your own child, that's whether it's with another child, a neighbor's child. It doesn't matter. It does not matter who it is. You may, if you're there and a child is telling you, you may be that child's only help to be protected. And to me, that is a God thing. That you're in that place. So just make the decision now. Now, don't wait until you're in that. Make the decision now that this is what if a child ever comes to me or I observe something that makes me feel uncomfortable, this is what I'm going to do. These are the steps that I'm going to take. Make it mechanical, like doing CPR. In other words, there are the other things that we do to help keep our children safe. That this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah. Yeah. You also said, don't talk to the abuser.
No. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Again, in terms of keeping it, I have now worked for a prosecutor's office, and in terms of keeping it to where it doesn't mean that there's a guarantee that they will be able to prosecute, but if you can keep the story from getting muddled and having like different sides and different versions, the prosecutor is better able to do the investigators and detectives are better able to do the job that they're designed to do. So absolutely. The best thing is to get away and just allow the event to unfold under the hands of the people who know what they are doing.
Mm-hmm. We talked about not questioning the victim. I think you've hit on this, trust God to bring the truth out. And you've also said this, the child is what matters. So I think you hit on everything there. So
I would say too that there is times when a child starts telling their story, and I would say not to stop them, but
mm-hmm.
you don't ask, if you ask any questions at all, it would be as simple as like, tell me more,
mm-hmm.
or what happened next. You don't do anything, and then you need to really be being intentional about remembering like what they say and how they said it, because
mm-hmm.
you're going to need to be able to let the next people, the investigator, the forensic investigators, know what it is that the child said, the original statement that the child said.
Yeah.
But I would definitely not stop a child if they were already talking.
In the middle of telling a story.
Right. And I would also let that child know at that time, I'm here for you. We're in this together. I'm going to be with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think too, being aware of your own reactions, which is really hard. As parents, I think we get more skilled with that, but being aware of how you react and how kids respond to that, especially if a child has been abused for any length of time, they are skilled in seeing your reactions and reacting and correcting their own story. The last thing a kid wants to do is to make their mom or dad cry or make them angry, and if they've been abused, they certainly don't want to get anybody in trouble. So keeping in mind that they may have been told a whole host of things would go wrong and happen if they told, to be very calm and be very aware is really important. So I'm going to go over these really succinctly. Call the police, whether you believe or not. In a non-scary, like you're going to pay for this way, call the police. Should not talk to the person that is accused, have a separation from them. If it's the parent, this parent should want to figure out why their kid is saying that. This parent should say, you know what, I'm stepping aside. This is a terrible, terrible thing to be accused of. What's worse is that my kid is accusing me of it. So I'm going to step aside and allow the law to figure out what's happening. Do not ask questions, like we said, and then believe your kids. I think that you hit on this when we had a conversation the other day, that it's so rare for a child to make up something like this out of nowhere and out of nothing. Do you want to talk more about that, Chanel?
Well, it just this shame and the fear and the embarrassment of having to say that, particularly a parent, but even anybody, that mm-hmm. somebody is doing something like this to them is mm-hmm. so huge that it's very rare. I don't have the exact statistics, but I remember when I looked at it, I mean, it's less than 1 or 2% that mm-hmm. ever there was an erroneous mm-hmm. statement, accusation, in other words. And just realizing that so rarely happens. And that, again, if we can get that child to the people who know what they are doing, they will be able to help the child. They will be able to hear the child. They will be able to do investigative things that they do in these circumstances to help bring about justice and safety for the child. So mm-hmm. it's just so important that we lean on those. When something like this happens, that we're not running to the church. We're not running to other family members. We are going to the authorities. This is legal matters. This is children's safety. Yeah. And that belongs with the authorities in our cities and in our states. Mm-hmm. Very, very important.
I'm looking at, we have some Facebook questions, and if anybody watching on online on Zoom has any questions, you can type them into the Q&A box or into the chat window, and we'll be here for a few more minutes answering those questions. But let me pull these up on Facebook. I know one question was, how long did the abuse go on for? If you're comfortable answering that, Chanel.
You know what? With my oldest, well, for one thing, I since found out he was abusing children before I even married him. So, and speaking about, and my children were not the only children that were abused, and that again is very, very typical with child abusers. This is not. It's very likely that they will have numerous victims in their lifetime, and it is rare for them to be prosecuted. So, as far as the abuse with my daughters, the oldest doesn't really actually remember when it started. So I think that would pretty much tell you how likely young she was when it began to occur. But she doesn't have like a number, in other words, a number to come up with. But again, this was going on
A long time.
before I know of victims, and during the time there was more victims than my children.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of these questions that are more general about predators will be answered in our How to Protect Your Kids. I'm going to talk a lot about who are predators, why do they do it, what are the statistics surrounding that. That is on August 22nd for those of you that are interested in that, and we'll obviously continue to advertise for that on our social media channels. But August 22nd at 2 p.m. and you can register for that at mendingthesoul.org webinars/webinars. I think that was the only question on Facebook. It's hard for me to view while we're talking. So, but Chanel and I are both in that group, so she can go back and answer any questions that you've posted there. And I don't see any popping up here in the room. Anything else we didn't touch on about what you went through? I told Chanel before we started, I think for all you moms out there that have made mistakes and you're kicking yourself, Chanel mentioned something really important about speaking those things. Someone told me long before I had kids that the most powerful thing you can do in the life of your children, your own children, is learn to apologize. And I have found that true in my own life. And I have found it true in my relationships with my own children. And I think you're experiencing it, Chanel, because as far as I know, you have very good relationships with all 4 of your kids. They can still come to you.
Yeah.
And that's because you've done the repair work. So if you've been in Mending the Soul, you know, we talk about if an abuser or someone that has participated in abuse really wants a relationship with you, they will say to you, I'm sorry, what do you need for reconciliation? I will do what you need for reconciliation. So if you're the parent and you've messed up, that should be your response. Not a justification, not an excuse, a sincere apology. And what do you need from me now? How can I make it right?
I would like to add too that one of the important things that I did was I educated myself on what were some of the responses that my girls were likely to have as a result of being abused, and I normalized those. I was like, I'm not going to make a big deal. So many times when children are abused, they're overly sexualized, so they may go ahead and exhibit sexualized behaviors. And there's just other things that come up, in other words. And I was like, okay, then I know these things. I know that these things are actually normal responses. So it was an abnormal situation. And so it was normal responses to an abnormal situation.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And a lot of times, because then we begin to make a big deal. Well, what I realized too is that when someone is abused, their power is taken away from them. So my children, their power over their own body and their own life was taken away from them at a very young age. So it became my job as their parent that loved them and that was in their life and healing to give them their power back. Yeah. So that meant I didn't look at I didn't ever tell them they were rebellious, ever. Because I knew that part of what they were going to need to do as they were growing was they were going to need to take their power back. It was going to need to be okay for them to disagree with me, and for me to honor their right for them to agree with me and to have their own voice and make their own mistakes without fearing that their mom was going to come down on them and tell them I told you so and be hard on them. They didn't need that.
Yeah.
They needed instead to be accepted and it to be given to them. And that's not a generation. I grew up in the generation that, oh no, that's disrespectful, that, you go down the list of the things. And And maybe that was right for that generation, but for when I was walking with my children to heal, that was not right for me to be doing those things.
Mm-hmm.
I had to do things differently. So I think being willing to be open. I also had to let go of fear, because by God, when all of this happened, then I wanted to control everywhere my children went and everything they did, because I was so fearful about them being harmed again.
Mm-hmm.
And in doing my own healing, I realized that I was causing further harm on them. That again, I needed to let go of that fear. I had some big lessons in learning to trust God, and
Mm-hmm.
going through those teenage years, instead of staying up all night long, worrying about where they were at, literally going to bed and going to sleep and being like, okay, God, you know,
That's hard.
it is hard. It's scary. It was not easy, but it was important, because I myself had lived my life in fear.
Mm-hmm.
When I look back to those years and all of the fear that I dealt with, that was as important for me as it was for them,
Mm-hmm.
to let go of that fear.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Jean asked me how she can share this. Jean, you cannot share directly from the Mending the Soul facilitator page, but if you go to mendingthesoul.org/webinars, we post the recordings there. You can also register for the webinars there and access the recordings through that registration link. I know some people were a little upset that the webinars weren't intuitive. I apologize for that. This is probably one of the easiest webinar platforms to work with. And so if you need any help, please just let us know. We're happy to get you the recording. Our person that posts those is on vacation though, so it might be a few days before it's on the website. It will still be in the Zoom link if you registered for the webinar. I think this was really good information, Chanel. I appreciate you. I think all the moms out there, all the dads out there, I say moms, typically, statistically, it's going to be the mom. It's going to be a woman. So I think we all appreciate you. I think this is a parent's worst fear, and you are alive.
Yeah,
I saw a t-shirt the other day. It says, "You didn't die, did you?" And I'm like, I need that.
well,
Are you dead?
It's interesting how God put people in our life, and one of them that he put in our life was the psychologist that saw the boys. It was a male, that Dr. Anderson, actually there in Mesa, Arizona. And I remember one time Dr. Anderson brought me in, and he said to me, he said, Chanel, you guys are going to be better than okay. He said, because of the fact that you have not swept this under the carpet, and that you have talked about it, and that you have gotten healing for yourself and for your children are going to be close. They are going to be in one another's lives. They are going to love one another. And that's exactly, Steffi, what has happened. My children we are very close as a family. We are very deep. Like when we talk, we know about one another. In other words, and we are able to be authentic and vulnerable with one another. And in essence, while what happened to us was never, ever right, I sure do love who we have become as we have walked through this, who I have become, who they have become. It's incredible. And I'm thankful.
Yeah. Just to close us out, if your kids have come to you, they came to you 30 years ago and you're not moving on in your head, I highly recommend the Mending the Soul group. You can find a group at mendingthesoul.org/find a group. If you don't see one there, we do have online facilitators who lead groups online. There are several churches who run groups. And so we highly encourage you to, at the very minimum, buy the textbook and read it, and at the very maximum, complete a group or two. The textbook will really help you with some of the things Chanel was talking about the behaviors, the symptomology, the consequences of abuse. It's very thorough. It's super helpful. It would also, if you are a victim of abuse and your parents did not react, it would help you understand yourself and them a little better. So I hope this has been good for everybody. Please join us next. Oh, go ahead.
We have the vulnerable child curriculum. So if your children are younger and they have suffered any type of abuse, we have the vulnerable child curriculum that can help you. Again, it has a textbook, it has a workbook that can help you with connecting with your child, helping them to process their story.
And your sister says, nice job. So
stuck with me. Thank you very much. She's awesome.
Next week we have Hannah, who's going to be talking about divorce, which is super common. And so she's going to talk to us about how she did that with intention toward healing, about her journey, and about how Mending the Soul was a part of that. So check that out, and we will look forward to seeing everybody next Thursday. Same bat time, same bat channel. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Steph.
Bye.
Bye-bye.